The hospital chapel was draped in black. Candles flickered. Soft music played. Everyone whispered. At the front row, his wife sat in mourning clothes. Perfect posture, dry eyes, lips pressed tight. Beside her sat another man. Too close. Too comfortable. They held hands beneath the program. Someone leaned over and whispered, "She's taking it well." She smiled faintly. "After all these years," she said quietly, "at least he finally gave me peace." Laughter, barely hidden, passed between her and the man at her side. Then the doors at the back of the chapel opened. A doctor stepped in, pale, breathing fast. "I'm sorry," he said loudly. "We made a mistake." The room froze. "He's alive." The wife's smile collapsed. Her hand slipped from her lover's grip, because the man they were dressed in black to celebrate had been listening the whole time. "Stay with me until the end. Because what the Mafia boss does next is not revenge. It's a reckoning." Before we begin, don't forget to like this video, hit subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. Now let's get started. Vincent Romano had built his empire from nothing. 25 years of blood, sweat, and calculated moves had made him one of the most feared men in the city. His name carried weight in every corner of the underworld, but power came with a price. And Vincent had always known that trust was the rarest currency in his world. What he never expected was that betrayal would come from the woman who shared his bed. Maria Romano had married Vincent when she was 22, young, beautiful, and hungry for the luxury his money could provide. She played her role perfectly for 15 years. The devoted wife who stood by her husband's side at every family gathering, every business dinner, every funeral for fallen associates. But beneath the designer dresses and diamond jewelry, Maria had grown tired of living in the shadow of a dangerous man. The late nights wondering if he would come home, alive. The constant fear that rival families might target her to get to him. The loneliness of being married to someone who trusted no one completely. Then she met Daniel. Daniel Martinez was Vincent's accountant. Smart, quiet, and patient. He had been handling the family's legitimate businesses for 3 years when Maria first noticed him. Unlike the rough men who surrounded her husband, Daniel spoke softly and wore pressed suits that smelled like expensive cologne instead of gunpowder. Their affair began slowly. Stolen glances during business meetings, accidental touches when he handed her documents to sign, coffee meetings that stretched into lunch, lunch meetings that became dinner at hotels far from Vincent's territory. For 6 months, they lived a double life. While Vincent conducted his business with iron discipline, Maria and Daniel planned their escape. They talked about running away together, starting fresh in another country where Vincent's reach couldn't find them. But running required money, lots of money, and Vincent kept his personal fortune locked away in accounts that only he could access. That's when they started planning something darker. Vincent had enemies everywhere. The Castellano family from the south side, the Russians who wanted to expand their drug operations into his territory, the federal agents who had been building cases against him for years. Any one of them would have gladly put a bullet in his head given the chance. Maria and Daniel didn't need to pull the trigger themselves. They just needed to create the right opportunity. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. During Vincent's monthly meeting with his underbosses, Daniel would slip a slow-acting drug into his coffee, something that would mimic a heart attack. Vincent would collapse, be rushed to the hospital, and with the right doctor on their payroll, be declared dead. Maria would play the grieving widow. She would inherit everything through the will Vincent had, signed years ago, back when he still trusted her completely. After a respectful period of mourning, she and Daniel would disappear together with enough money to live like royalty anywhere in the world. But the best-laid plans often crumble when real bullets start flying. The night before their plan was supposed to unfold, Vincent's warehouse was hit by a rival family. 3 of his men were killed. Vincent himself took 2 bullets to the chest while trying to escape through the loading dock. Real blood, real ambulance sirens, real doctors fighting to save his life. Maria got the call at 2 in the morning. Vincent was in critical condition at Metropolitan Hospital. The doctors weren't sure he would make it through the night. She should have felt panic, fear for her husband's life, worry about what would happen to her if he died. Instead, she felt relief. This was even better than their original plan. Vincent might actually die on his own, and she would inherit everything without having to orchestrate his murder. No drugs to trace, no paid-off doctors to worry about. Just a grieving widow whose husband was killed by his enemies. Daniel arrived at the hospital 20 minutes after her call. They sat in the waiting room, holding hands beneath a magazine, whispering about how this changed everything. "The doctors say he might not wake up," Maria told him quietly. "Even if he survives, he could be in a coma for weeks." "That's perfect," Daniel replied. "We can start moving money immediately. By the time anyone realizes what's happening, we'll be long gone." But Vincent Romano hadn't survived 25 years in the Mafia by being easy to kill. 3 days after the shooting, he opened his eyes, weak, barely able to speak, but alive. The doctors called it a miracle. Maria called it a disaster. Vincent spent the next week drifting in and out of consciousness. The medications kept him disoriented and confused. He couldn't tell the difference between dreams and reality. Sometimes he thought he was back in the old neighborhood where he grew up. Sometimes he believed he was already dead, but his hearing never failed him. During those foggy days, Vincent heard conversations that weren't meant for his ears. Doctors discussing his condition in clinical terms. Nurses gossiping about the police investigation into the warehouse shooting. And most importantly, hushed conversations between his wife and a man whose voice he didn't immediately recognize. They talked about money, about bank accounts in Switzerland and the Cayman Islands, about forged documents and new identities, about how much longer they would have to wait before they could make their move. At first, Vincent thought he was hallucinating. The drugs made everything feel unreal, but as the days passed and his mind cleared, the conversations became sharper, more detailed, more damning. His wife was planning to steal his life's work and run away with another man. Vincent had always known that loyalty was rare in his world. He had ordered the deaths of men who betrayed him. He had watched friends become enemies over money and territory. But hearing the woman he had trusted with his life planning his financial execution while he lay helpless cut deeper than any bullet. So he decided to listen and learn and plan. Vincent kept his eyes closed during their visits. He controlled his breathing to appear unconscious. He memorized every detail of their scheme, every timeline they discussed, every weakness in their plan. They were going to wait until the doctors declared him stable enough to go home. Then they would have him transferred to a private facility where Daniel's medical contacts could ensure he never woke up again. A tragic complication from his injuries. Another casualty of the dangerous life he had chosen. Maria would inherit everything as his widow. Within 6 months, they would liquidate his assets and disappear forever. But Vincent Romano had other plans. The day they scheduled his memorial service, Vincent was very much alive and listening. He heard every word as his wife and her lover celebrated his supposed death just 20 feet away from his hospital bed. He heard them mock his memory. He heard them laugh about how easy it had been to fool everyone. He heard them plan their new life together with his money. And in that moment, lying perfectly still in a hospital bed surrounded by machines that monitored his every heartbeat, Vincent Romano began planning the most important operation of his criminal career. Not the murder of a rival, not the expansion of territory, not the elimination of a threat to his business, the complete and total destruction of the two people who had dared to betray him when he was at his most vulnerable. Because in Vincent's world, there was only one punishment for betrayal. And Maria and Daniel were about to learn that lesson in the most terrifying way possible, defying way possible. The first phase of Vincent's plan required patience, something he had learned from decades of watching enemies destroy themselves when they thought they were winning. For 3 more days, He remained motionless in his hospital bed, eyes closed, breathing steady, machines beeping rhythmically around him. But his mind was sharp as a blade, calculating every move. Maria and Daniel grew bolder with each passing hour. They believed their secret was safe. They believed Vincent would never wake up to expose them. They believed they had won. That confidence would become their downfall. On Tuesday morning, Vincent heard Daniel's voice closer than usual. The man was leaning over his bed, speaking directly to Maria, who stood on the other side. "The doctors say we can transfer him to the private facility tomorrow," Daniel whispered. "Dr. Hendricks has everything ready. Within 48 hours, this will all be over." Maria's voice carried a coldness Vincent had never heard before. "Good. I'm tired of pretending to care. Do you know how exhausting it is to sit here and act like the devoted wife? Soon you won't have to act anymore," Daniel replied. "We'll be on a beach somewhere, and Vincent Romano will be nothing but a bad memory." They kissed, right there beside his bed, believing he couldn't see or hear. The sound made Vincent's blood burn, but he remained perfectly still. That afternoon, Vincent made his first move. When the nurse came to check his vitals, he squeezed her hand. Just once, barely noticeable, but enough. "Doctor," she called out excitedly. "I think he's responding." Dr. Patterson rushed in, followed immediately by Maria, who had been waiting in the hallway. Vincent could feel their eyes on him, watching for any sign of consciousness. He gave them nothing. No movement, no change in breathing, no flutter of eyelids. "Must have been a muscle spasm," Dr. Patterson concluded after several minutes of observation. "Sometimes happens with patients in his condition." But the seed of doubt had been planted. Vincent saw it in the way Maria's shoulders tensed, heard it in how Daniel's voice carried a slight tremor when he spoke to her later. "What if he did respond?" Daniel asked nervously. "What if he's more aware than we think?" "Impossible," Maria replied, but her voice lacked conviction. "The doctors said his brain activity is minimal. He's basically a vegetable." Vincent filed that insult away with all the others. The list was getting longer. Over the next 24 hours, Vincent orchestrated 3 more responses. A twitch of his finger when a nurse adjusted his blanket. A slight change in breathing when someone mentioned his name. A barely perceptible movement of his head when the television volume was raised. Each incident was subtle enough to be dismissed as coincidence. But together, they created a pattern that made everyone nervous, including Maria and Daniel. "We need to move faster," Daniel urged during one of their whispered conversations. "If there's even a chance he might wake up." "He won't," Maria insisted, but Vincent heard the fear creeping into her voice. "Even if he does, what's he going to do? He's weak as a baby. He can barely breathe on his own." Vincent almost smiled at that. They had no idea what was coming. The night before his scheduled transfer, Vincent put the final piece of his plan into motion. He had been watching the hospital staff for weeks, learning their routines, memorizing their schedules, identifying the weak links. Nurse Janet worked the late shift, single mother of 2, struggling to pay rent. Vincent had heard her on the phone with her landlord, begging for more time. When she came to check on him at midnight, Vincent opened his eyes. Janet gasped and stepped backward. "Mr. Romano, can you hear me?" Vincent's voice came out as a whisper, barely audible. "Help me." "Oh my God," Janet breathed. "You're awake. I need to call the doctor immediately." "No." Vincent's hand moved slowly, catching her wrist with surprising strength. "Listen to me first." Janet looked terrified, but she didn't pull away. "What is it?" "My wife," Vincent whispered. "She's trying to kill me tomorrow during the transfer." "That's impossible," Janet said, but her voice wavered. "She loves you. She's been here every day." Vincent's eyes locked onto hers. "Check my chart. Look at the medications they want to give me tomorrow. Then look up what those drugs really do." Janet hesitated. She glanced toward the door, then back at Vincent. "There's $50,000 in cash hidden behind the water heater in my garage," Vincent continued. "The address is on my intake form. Take it. All of it. Just help me stop them." $50,000. More money than Janet would make in 2 years of nursing. More than enough to solve her problems and give her children a better life. "What do you want me to do?" she asked quietly. Vincent smiled for the first time in weeks. "Switch my IV bag with saline. Nothing else. No drugs, no sedatives, just salt water. But if the doctors find out, they won't. Because tomorrow morning, you're going to call in sick. By the time anyone realizes what happened, you'll be long gone with that money." Janet stared at him for a long moment. Then she nodded. "One more thing," Vincent added. "When my wife and her boyfriend show up tomorrow, tell them I had a bad reaction during the night. Tell them I'm completely unresponsive now. Make them believe it worked." The next morning, Vincent lay perfectly still as chaos erupted around his bed. "What happened?" Maria demanded as Dr. Hendricks examined Vincent's motionless form. "I'm not sure," the doctor replied, his voice tense with confusion. "His vitals crashed around 3 a.m. We had to increase his medication significantly." Daniel stepped closer, studying Vincent's face. He's alive, but barely," Dr. Hendricks said. "I'm afraid the transfer will have to be postponed. He's too unstable to move." Vincent watched through barely open eyelids as Maria and Daniel exchanged glances. Relief and frustration warred on their faces. "How long before he stabilizes?" Maria asked. "Hard to say. Could be days. Could be weeks." That wasn't the answer they wanted to hear. Vincent could sense their growing anxiety. Every day that passed was another day their secret might be exposed. Another day someone might start asking questions about their relationship. "Doctor," Daniel said carefully, "given his condition, what are his actual chances of recovery?" Dr. Hendricks shook his head gravely. "Honestly, very poor. Even if he stabilizes, the brain damage from oxygen deprivation during the shooting," he trailed off diplomatically. "So he's never going to wake up?" Maria pressed. "I wouldn't count on it." Vincent almost laughed. If only they knew that every word they spoke was being recorded in his memory. Every plan they made was being added to his growing list of evidence. Because Vincent Romano wasn't just planning to survive their betrayal. He was planning to make sure everyone knew exactly what kind of people they really were. The next phase would require more than just patience. It would require the kind of cold, calculated brutality that had made his name feared throughout the city. And Maria and Daniel were about to discover that the man they thought they had destroyed was about to rise from the dead, with 25 years of criminal expertise at his disposal. Because in Vincent's world, betrayal wasn't just a crime. It was a death sentence. It was a death sentence. The wheels of Vincent's plan began turning faster than Maria and Daniel could imagine. While they believed they controlled his fate, Vincent was orchestrating their destruction from his hospital bed. 3 days after the failed transfer, Vincent made his next calculated move. During the morning shift change, he caught the attention of Dr. Patterson with a subtle hand gesture, just enough to seem accidental, but deliberate enough to plant more doubt. "I could have sworn I saw him move," Dr. Patterson mentioned to the nursing staff later. "His fingers definitely twitched when I mentioned the police investigation." Word spread quickly through the hospital corridors. Whispers about the Mafia boss, who might be more aware than anyone realized. Vincent heard every conversation, cataloged every detail, and smiled inwardly as paranoia began eating away at Maria and Daniel's confidence. That evening, Daniel paced nervously around Vincent's bed, while Maria sat rigid in her chair. "This is taking too long," Daniel hissed. "People are starting to talk. The police asked me questions yesterday about the warehouse shooting. They wanted to know about my relationship with the family's finances. What did you tell them?" Maria's voice carried an edge Vincent had never heard during their marriage. "Nothing that could hurt us. But if Vincent wakes up..." Daniel's words hung in the air like a threat. "He won't," Maria snapped, but Vincent could hear the desperation beneath her certainty. "Look at him. He's practically dead already." Vincent lay motionless, every muscle relaxed, breathing steady and shallow. But inside, his mind was recording every word for the reckoning that was coming. The next morning brought unexpected visitors. Two federal agents approached Vincent's room, their footsteps echoing down the sterile hospital corridor. Vincent recognized their voices from previous investigations into his operations. Agent Morrison and Agent Chen, FBI, the lead agent announced to Maria. We need to ask you some questions about your husband's recent business activities. Vincent felt Maria's tension from across the room. Her chair creaked as she shifted uncomfortably. My husband is fighting for his life, she replied coldly. This hardly seems like appropriate timing. Ma'am, 3 people died in that warehouse. We have reason to believe your husband was specifically targeted. We need to understand why. Daniel stepped forward, his voice carefully controlled. As the family's accountant, I can tell you that Mr. Romano's legitimate businesses have always operated within legal boundaries. Agent Morrison's laugh carried no humor. Legitimate businesses, right. Tell me, Mr. Martinez, how long have you been handling the Romano family's financial affairs? 3 years, Daniel answered quickly. Too quickly. And in those 3 years, have you noticed any unusual cash flows? Large deposits that couldn't be explained through normal business operations? Vincent watched through barely open eyes as Daniel's composure began cracking. Sweat beaded on his forehead, despite the cool hospital air. I handle multiple accounts for various clients, Daniel stammered. I couldn't possibly remember every transaction. Agent Chen stepped closer to Vincent's bed, studying his face intently. Has he shown any signs of consciousness since the shooting? None, Maria said firmly. The doctors say his chances of recovery are essentially 0. Interesting. Agent Chen pulled out a small recording device. Because we have audio from the warehouse that night. Your husband was heard giving specific instructions to his men even after he was shot. That doesn't sound like someone whose brain was severely damaged. The room fell silent except for the steady beeping of Vincent's monitors. He could feel the fear radiating from Maria and Daniel like heat from a fire. We'll be back tomorrow, Agent Morrison announced. If Mr. Romano's condition changes, we expect to be notified immediately. After the agents left, Daniel exploded in whispered fury. This is falling apart, he hissed at Maria. They suspect something. If they start digging into the financial records, then we need to move faster. Maria replied coldly. Tonight. Vincent's blood chilled as he heard the desperation in their voices. They were no longer planning to wait for his natural death or even the controlled elimination they had originally plotted. They were going to kill him in his hospital bed within hours. How? Daniel asked, his voice shaking. You're the one with medical contacts, Maria said. Figure it out. Make it look like complications from his injuries, something the doctors won't question. Daniel was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice carried the coldness of a man who had crossed a line he could never step back over. There's a drug that mimics heart failure, completely undetectable unless you know exactly what to look for. I can have it here within an hour. Do it, Maria said without hesitation. As their footsteps faded down the hallway, Vincent finally allowed himself to move, just slightly, just enough to reach the call button beside his bed. When Nurse Janet's replacement arrived, Vincent was ready. I need you to contact Detective Ray Castellanos immediately, he whispered to the shocked nurse. Tell him Vincent Romano is awake and has information about the warehouse shooting. Tell him to bring backup. Mr. Romano, you're awake. I need to call the doctor. No. Vincent's voice carried the authority that had commanded respect for 25 years. Do exactly what I told you. Lives depend on it, including mine. The nurse hesitated for only a moment before reaching for the phone. 30 minutes later, Detective Castellanos arrived with 3 uniformed officers. Vincent had worked with the detective before, during territorial disputes that required police intervention. They understood each other. Vincent, Castellanos said quietly, approaching the bed. We heard you were in a coma. I've been listening, Vincent replied, his voice stronger now. My wife and her lover are planning to kill me tonight. They've been stealing money and planning to disappear. They think I'm brain dead. Castellanos pulled out a recording device. Tell me everything. For the next 20 minutes, Vincent detailed every conversation he had overheard. Every plan Maria and Daniel had made, every timeline they had discussed, every crime they intended to commit. "We'll need proof," Castellanos said, when Vincent finished. Vincent smiled for the first time since waking up. "They're bringing poison to inject into my IV line tonight. All you need to do is wait." At 11 p.m., the hospital corridor was nearly empty. Only the soft sound of footsteps on polished floors and the distant hum of medical equipment filled the air. Vincent lay perfectly still as Daniel approached his bed, carrying a small medical bag. Maria followed close behind, her eyes constantly scanning the hallway for witnesses. Hidden cameras that Detective Castellanos had installed captured every movement as Daniel prepared a syringe filled with clear liquid. "This will be quick," Daniel whispered to Maria. "His heart will stop within minutes. The doctors will assume it was complications from the shooting." "Finally," Maria breathed. "After tonight, we'll never have to see this place again." Daniel leaned over Vincent's bed, syringe in hand. "Goodbye, Vincent. Thanks for the inheritance." As the needle approached Vincent's IV line, Detective Castellanos and his officers burst through the door. "Freeze! Police!" Daniel dropped the syringe, his face white with terror. Maria stumbled backward, her mouth open in shock. "Vincent Romano," Castellanos announced loudly. "You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder." But Vincent was already sitting up in bed, his eyes blazing with the fury of a man who had been betrayed by the people he trusted most. "Actually, Detective," Vincent said, his voice carrying the cold authority that had made him legendary, "I think you have the wrong suspects." Maria's scream echoed through the hospital corridor as she realized that the man she thought she had destroyed was very much alive and very much in control. The game was over, but Vincent's reckoning had only just begun. Just begun. The handcuffs clicked around Maria's wrists with a sound that echoed through the hospital corridor like gunshots. Her perfectly manicured nails, the same ones that had caressed Daniel's face while planning Vincent's death, now scraped uselessly against cold metal. "You have the right to remain silent," Detective Castellanos recited as Daniel collapsed to his knees beside the dropped syringe. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Vincent swung his legs over the side of the hospital bed, his movements deliberate and controlled. The machines that had monitored his supposedly dying body continued their steady beeping, a mechanical heartbeat that had counted down to this moment for weeks. "Vincent," Maria whispered, her voice breaking. "Please, I can explain everything." He looked at her with eyes that held no warmth, no recognition of the 15 years they had shared. "Explain what, Maria? How you celebrated my death while I was fighting for my life? How you planned to inject poison into my veins while I slept?" Daniel lifted his head from the floor, tears streaming down his face. "We never meant for it to go this far. The shooting changed everything. We thought you were going to die anyway, so you decided to help fate along." Vincent's voice carried the quiet menace that had made hardened criminals confess their sins. "You thought the man who survived 25 years of gang wars would be defeated by his own wife and a coward with a calculator." The federal agents who had questioned Maria earlier appeared at the doorway, their faces grim with satisfaction. Agent Morrison stepped forward with additional handcuffs. "Mr. Martinez, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder, and embezzlement of funds connected to a criminal enterprise." As they led Daniel away, he turned back toward Vincent with desperation carved into his features. "The money, Vincent. We can give it all back. Every penny. Just please." "Please what?" Vincent stood now, his hospital gown replaced by the dignity of a man who had reclaimed his power. "Please forgive the fact that you counted my heartbeats while planning to stop them forever." Maria struggled against the officers holding her, her composure finally cracking completely. "You don't understand the pressure I was under, living with you, never knowing if you'd come home alive. I was scared, Vincent. I was lonely. Lonely." Vincent repeated the word like he was tasting poison. "So lonely that you found comfort in my accountant's bed. So scared that you decided murder was your solution." The hospital corridor had filled with staff and patients drawn by the commotion. Vincent saw recognition in their faces, the mixture of fear and fascination that his name had always commanded. But now there was something else, respect for a man who had crawled back from the grave to expose the truth. Detective Castellanos approached Vincent with a folder thick with documents. "We'll need your full testimony for the trial. Everything you heard. Every detail you remember. You'll have it all," Vincent replied. "But first I want to know how deep this goes. Who else knew? Who else was involved?" Maria's head snapped up, panic flashing in her eyes. "No one else knew, Vincent. I swear it was just Daniel and me." But Vincent had spent decades reading lies in people's faces. "Detective, I suggest you examine my wife's phone records very carefully. Check her communications with Dr. Hendricks, the man who was supposed to oversee my transfer to that private facility." Agent Chen stepped forward, understanding immediately. "You think the doctor was part of the conspiracy? I think my wife is smarter than she pretends to be, and greedier than I ever imagined." As if summoned by his words, Dr. Hendricks appeared at the end of the hallway, his face pale as he saw the scene unfolding. He turned to leave, but two uniformed officers were already moving to intercept him. "Going somewhere, Doctor?" Agent Morrison called out. Vincent watched as the final piece of the conspiracy crumbled. The doctor who had been ready to declare him brain dead, the man who would have signed papers authorizing Maria to make medical decisions, the professional who would have administered the fatal injection and ruled it a tragic complication. "How much did they pay you?" Vincent asked as they brought Dr. Hendricks closer. The doctor's shoulders sagged in defeat. 50,000. They promised it would look natural. No one would ever know. $50,000 to murder a patient in your care. Vincent's voice carried disgust that made everyone in the corridor step back. "The same amount I offered my nurse to help save my life." Maria looked between Vincent and Dr. Hendricks, her face twisting with rage. "You knew. You've been awake this whole time, listening to everything. I heard every word, Maria, every laugh, every plan, every moment you celebrated my death while I fought to stay alive." The weight of her betrayal settled over the corridor like a heavy blanket. Vincent had survived bullets and bombs, rival families and federal investigations. But the woman who had promised to love him in sickness and health had been the one to push him closest to the grave. "Take them away," Detective Castellanos ordered. As the officers led Maria past Vincent toward the elevator, she stopped and looked at him one final time. "I did love you once, Vincent. Before the fear, before the loneliness, before I realized that loving you meant waiting every day for a phone call telling me you were dead." Vincent watched her disappear into the elevator, her black mourning dress a cruel irony against the handcuffs that bound her wrists. The woman who had worn widow's clothes to celebrate his death was now dressed perfectly for her own funeral. The hospital corridor fell quiet, except for the steady beeping of machines and the distant sound of sirens. Vincent Romano had risen from what everyone believed was his deathbed, not through miracle or luck, but through the cold calculation that had built his empire. In the end, Maria and Daniel had made the same mistake that had destroyed countless others who challenged Vincent Romano. They had mistaken silence for weakness, stillness for defeat, and loyalty for stupidity. Vincent had learned long ago that the most dangerous enemies were often the ones sleeping beside you, but he had also learned that patience, properly applied, could turn any betrayal into justice. The moral of Vincent's story is simple but brutal. When people believe you are powerless, they reveal who they truly are, and when they celebrate your fall, they prepare the stage for their own destruction.